Welcome to Part 3, Becoming an Expert. At the far right end of that learning continuum we keep referring to sits a small elite group, the experts. These are the outstanding, exceptional performers in their fields, the people who operate at a level the rest of us can only admire, in sport, in dance, in music, in surgery, in countless domains. They're a relatively new area of study in motor learning, but we've learned some fascinating things about them. In this section, we're going to ask two big questions about these people. First, what does it actually take to get there? Is it talent? Is it luck? Is it endless hours? Or is it something more specific? And second, once someone reaches that elite level, what is genuinely different about how they think, perceive, and make decisions? Some of the answers will probably match your intuition pretty well, but at least one of them tends to surprise almost everyone in the room, and it overturns a belief that most people hold about experts. So keep an open mind as we go, and let's find out what truly sets the very best apart. So, what makes an expert? Let's start with the headline finding, which comes from a landmark line of research by Erickson and his colleagues. The big number is right there on the screen. Roughly 10 years of intense practice, at minimum, across just about every field they examined, from chess to music to sport. 10 years is the rough floor for world-class expertise. But here is the absolutely critical caveat, and please don't miss it. The years are only half the story. 10 years of casual, comfortable, going through the motions practice will not make you an expert. It just won't. What matters most is not simply how long you practice, but the kind of practice you engage in. Think about it this way. Two people can both put in a full decade at the same activity and end up worlds apart in skill, because one was truly pushing and refining the whole time, while the other was just logging hours on cruise control. So when you hear popular phrases like 10,000 hours, I want you to be a little skeptical and dig deeper, because the raw hours are not the magic ingredient by themselves. The quality and the structure of those hours is what actually builds expertise. And that special, high-quality kind of practice has a specific name and a specific definition, which is exactly what we'll unpack on the next slide. That special kind of practice is called deliberate practice, and the definition on the slide is worth reading carefully because every word counts. Deliberate practice is training activities specifically designed by a coach or teacher to improve particular parts of your performance through repetition and successive refinement. Let's unpack what that really looks like using the two cards. First card, it's work-like and guided. This means hours of genuinely effortful practice, usually with expert instruction zeroing in on your specific weak spots. And here's the uncomfortable truth. It is not fun in the usual sense. It is not comfortably running through the things you already do well, which is what most people default to. It's hard, focused, often frustrating, and aimed squarely at what you can't yet do. That difficulty is the point. Second card, expertise is domain-specific, which means it does not transfer from one field to another. Being a chess grandmaster gives you absolutely no advantage on a basketball court, and vice versa. The knowledge, the perceptual skills, the refined movements are all tied tightly to the specific domain in which they were built. There's no general expertise muscle you can train once and apply everywhere. So put these together and you get a clear, if humbling, recipe. Expertise is built deliberately with expert guidance over many years, one specific domain at a time, by repeatedly attacking your weaknesses rather than rehearsing your strengths. Beyond the practice it takes to get there, how do experts actually think and perceive differently once they've arrived? There are three big differences, shown on the three cards. First, knowledge. Experts obviously know more than novices, but the deeper point is that their knowledge is organized differently. It's structured into rich, interconnected concepts and patterns that they can pull from instantly, rather than a loose pile of isolated facts. They've essentially built better mental filing cabinets. Second, decisions. Because of that superior organization, experts make decisions faster and more accurately, and crucially, they anticipate. Picture a skilled basketball point guard bringing the ball up the floor. In a single glance at one or two defenders, they read the entire defense, predict what's about to unfold, and decide whether to pass, drive, or shoot,
all before a novice could even gather the same information. Third, vision, which connects back to what we saw in part 2. Experts search the environment faster, pick up the meaningful cues sooner, and recognize patterns earlier than novices do. And here's a key point. Research shows this comes from experience and practice, not from having physically better eyesight. Their eyes aren't sharper, their interpretation is. So expertise turns out to be just as much about perception, knowledge, and decision-making as it is about the physical movements themselves. The expert's biggest advantage is often between the ears.
And now here's the surprise I promised back at the start of this section. Based on everything we've said about skills becoming automatic, you would naturally assume that experts reach a state of effortless, fully automatic performance, pure autopilot, and just cruise. According to Erickson, that assumption is actually false, and the graph on the slide shows why. Follow the dashed gray line first. That's everyday activities. For ordinary skills, we practice until we reach a level that's good enough, and then we happily let the skill go automatic, where, notice, it quietly stops improving. It plateaus. And that's completely fine for tying your shoes or making your morning coffee. But now follow the red line, the experts. They do the opposite of cruising. Experts actively fight against full automaticity. They deliberately stay consciously engaged with their own performance, monitoring it, analyzing it, picking it apart, precisely so they can keep refining it and keep adapting to new challenges. In a real sense, the expert keeps choosing to re-enter the earlier, effortful thinking stages of learning, just at a much higher level than a beginner ever could. So the very thing that feels like the goal for everyday skills, comfortable automatic performance, is the thing experts intentionally resist. That refusal to coast on autopilot is a big part of what keeps them climbing while everyone else levels off.
Let's wrap up part 3. What sets experts apart? 5 things to take with you. First, expertise grows from roughly 10 years of deliberate practice, the kind that's focused, expertly guided, and genuinely effortful, not merely time served on cruise control. Second, it's domain-specific, so hard-won mastery in one field rarely carries over to another. Third, experts hold richly organized knowledge, structured into connected concepts, which lets them make decisions faster and anticipate what's coming next. Fourth, they use vision more efficiently, extracting more meaning from fewer, smarter glances, an advantage built by experience rather than better eyesight. And fifth, the surprising one. They actively resist full automaticity, staying consciously engaged so they can keep improving instead of plateauing. I want you to notice something elegant here. That last point is a beautiful mirror image of where this whole chapter began. The beginner can't help but think consciously about everything because the skill demands it. The expert, who could easily let everything run on autopilot, instead chooses to stay thoughtfully engaged. Conscious effort bookends the journey, but for completely opposite reasons. Now, before our final takeaways, let's look at 3 visual summaries that pull this entire chapter together for 3 different kinds of practitioners. Let's pull the whole chapter together with our first visual summary, this one framed for coaches and teachers. Take a moment to read it as a single map. Notice the message running across the top. Experts often struggle to teach beginners, so we have to match our instructions, our feedback, and our practice design to the learner's current stage. On the left side is the initial stage, solving the movement problem. See the key finding called out there? Beginners freeze their degrees of freedom, locking their joints so the movement looks stiff or stick-like, exactly what we discussed in part 2. The coach's job at this point is to emphasize what to achieve, the action goal, rather than perfecting mechanics, and to expect those big, rapid early gains that the power law of practice predicts. The table in the middle is really the heart of the whole image, so let's read it across. For each of the 3 Fitz and Posner stages, it lists the learner's focus and the matching coach's role. In the cognitive stage, the learner asks, how do I hold this? What's my goal? So the coach gives clear instructions and feedback. In the associative stage, the learner refines mechanics and consistency, so the coach builds practice sessions for repetition without repetition, Bernstein's freeze. In the autonomous stage, movement is automatic,
so the coach provides intense, deliberate practice to avoid stagnation. Finally, on the right, moving toward expertise. Fixation to refine closed skills, diversification to vary open skills. Plus an important warning. Forcing a skilled performer to consciously think about their mechanics can disrupt their automatic flow and trigger choking. Essentially everything we've discussed today, captured on a single page.
Here's the same journey drawn for movement instructors, and I love the framing. From beginner freeze to expert flow. Let's walk through it together. Across the top are our 3 familiar Fitz and Posner stages. Stage 1, the cognitive discovery phase. Notice the brain surrounded by arrows and question marks, and the little figure described as frozen and clunky. The learner is focused on what to do and is making frequent, large errors as they solve the basic movement problem. Stage 2, the associative refining phase. The learner transitions from thinking to doing, now working on consistency and, importantly, starting to detect their own mistakes. Stage 3, the autonomous automatic phase. Movement becomes habitual, a fluid flow state, which frees the performer up to multitask or focus on high-level strategy. Now, look along the bottom, where the practical instructional strategies live. First, manage the degrees of freedom. Allow beginners to freeze their joints early on, then gradually encourage the freeing into fluid, synergetic motion. Second, match your practice to the skill type, the closed versus open distinction from Gentile. Use fixation and repetition for closed skills, like ballet or a free throw, and use diversification for open skills, like soccer, where conditions constantly change. And third, that final caution on the right, beware the practice specificity trap. Don't let students become over-reliant on cues like mirrors that simply won't be there during real performance. In one picture, this poster captures essentially all of Part 2 and Part 3. And our last visual brings everything into the clinic, a therapist's guide to the stages of motor learning. This one matters because the principles we've discussed aren't just for athletes and musicians. They're central to physical and occupational rehabilitation. Read the idea up top. Therapists guide patients from beginner to expert by aligning their feedback with the physiological and cognitive shifts happening during motor relearning. On the left, the cognitive and initial stage. The patient is solving the movement problem, working out what to do and how to do it. And just like our healthy beginners, they freeze degrees of freedom, holding joints rigid to simplify control while they regain it. The therapist's role is to emphasize the action goal and to help the patient distinguish the relevant cues from the distractions. Now, move to the right, the associative and later stages. Here, those frozen joints free up, so the limb segments begin working together in a functional synergy, illustrated by the figure walking with the arms swinging naturally. Practice splits by skill type again, just as Gentile taught us. Closed skills, like reaching for a cup, focus on consistency, while open skills, like walking through a crowd, focus on adapting to a changing environment. And notice the supporting fact on the far right, which ties straight back to Part 2. As recovery progresses, conscious attention and energy cost both go down, while the ability to detect one's own errors goes up. It's the very same science we've studied all chapter, now put to work in the service of recovery. With that, let's land on our final takeaways.
Let's bring it all home with 3 takeaways that I hope stay with you long after this chapter. Takeaway 1. The stages are real. Beginners and experts genuinely think, move, and see in different ways. So effective teaching, coaching, or therapy means meeting each learner exactly where they are on the continuum, not where you are. The instructions that help a beginner are not the instructions that help an expert. Takeaway 2. Change is everywhere. As a skill is learned, coordination, attention, muscle use, energy cost, error detection, and even the brain itself all reorganize together, and they all move in the same direction, toward greater efficiency. Takeaway 3. Practice made well is everything. Expertise doesn't come from talent alone or from simply logging hours. It comes from years of deliberate, focused, guided practice, plus a deliberate refusal to coast on autopilot once you get good. If you take away nothing else from Chapter 12, take this single sentence. Learning is not just doing something more times. It is a deep, whole system reorganization of the performer, from their muscles to their mind.
Understand that, and you'll be a far better teacher, coach, or clinician than someone who just hands out drills and hopes. Thank you all. That brings us to the end of our chapter on the stages of learning.